What if the most powerful leadership strategies used by today's elite CEOs weren't invented in Silicon Valley, Harvard Business School, or Wall Street boardrooms? What if they were mastered 2,000 years ago by someone who built the most influential organization in human history without a single PowerPoint presentation, marketing budget, or corporate structure? Here's what nobody tells you. The leadership principles that transform 12 ordinary people into world changers are the same secrets that separate elite CEOs from average managers today. These 3 hidden strategies are so powerful that modern executives pay millions to consultants who don't even realize they're teaching ancient wisdom. Ready to discover the leadership secrets that built an empire lasting 2 millennia? If you're leading teams, building companies, or creating movements that matter, the most powerful leadership secrets aren't in modern business books. They're hidden in the greatest case study of transformational leadership ever. Here's what every leadership expert gets wrong about building high-performing teams. They focus on compensation, culture, and communication, but they miss the psychological mystery that reveals something far more profound. Jesus built the most committed team in history using people who had every reason to quit. Think about this logically. His 12 core team members weren't elite performers, Ivy League graduates, or industry experts. They were fishermen, tax collectors, and political radicals with conflicting personalities, opposing worldviews, and no shared background. Modern HR would never approve this hiring strategy. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Not only did this mismatched team stay together through impossible challenges, they performed at levels that defied rational explanation. They endured persecution, poverty, and life-threatening situations while maintaining absolute commitment to the mission. This violates everything we know about team dynamics and retention psychology. Research shows that high-stress environments typically cause team fragmentation. Competing priorities create conflict, and diverse personalities without shared frameworks lead to dysfunction. Yet something extraordinary happened. Instead of falling apart under pressure, this team became more cohesive. Instead of competing for position, they collaborated for impact. Instead of abandoning the mission when difficulties arose, they doubled down on commitment. Malcolm Gladwell would call this an outlier, team performance that breaks normal patterns of human behavior. But here's the mystery that modern leadership experts can't explain. How did Jesus create such unprecedented team loyalty that members chose persecution over resignation? Consider the psychological complexity. These weren't people predisposed to follow authority. Peter was impulsive and confrontational. Thomas was naturally skeptical. Matthew had been despised by his colleagues. Yet somehow, Jesus transformed this collection of individuals into a unified force that changed the world. The mystery deepens when you realize this wasn't temporary motivation or emotional manipulation. The commitment lasted decades, through circumstances that would break most teams within weeks. What leadership principle was so sophisticated that it created unbreakable team cohesion without traditional incentives, hierarchies, or control mechanisms? Character count. 2099 section 1.2. The revelation. Target 3700 characters. Here's the first hidden secret that elite CEOs pay millions to learn. Jesus had mastered what modern leadership research calls identity-based motivation, the most powerful form of team engagement ever documented. Instead of trying to motivate people to do their jobs better, he helped them become leaders who naturally excelled. But this goes far deeper than simple empowerment. Neuroscience research reveals that when people's core identity shifts from employee to owner, it triggers what's called neurological ownership. The brain literally processes the organization's success as personal success, creating intrinsic motivation that no external incentive can match. Think about the psychological sophistication required. Jesus had to help 12 individuals simultaneously transform their self-concept from followers to leaders, from workers to owners, from hired help to heirs. This requires precise understanding of how identity transformation creates lasting behavioral change. Modern research shows this demands 3 critical conditions. The new identity must feel more authentic than the current one. The transformation must seem achievable through specific actions, and the person must experience immediate evidence that the change is real. Jesus mastered all three. He didn't just delegate tasks. He revealed leadership potential that people didn't know they possessed. He didn't give impossible assignments. He created opportunities for each person to experience success in their unique strengths. And he provided immediate feedback that proved their leadership capacity was real and growing. But here's the psychological masterstroke. He made each person feel like they were essential to something historically significant. This triggered what researchers call legacy motivation, the drive to contribute to something that will outlast your lifetime. When people believe their individual contribution is crucial to a mission larger than themselves, they don't just work harder, they think differently. They solve problems proactively, take ownership of outcomes, and maintain commitment through difficulties because they're not just doing a job, they're building a legacy. This explains why his team performed at extraordinary levels. They weren't motivated by external rewards or avoiding negative consequences. They were driven by the intrinsic satisfaction of expressing their authentic leadership identity in service of a meaningful mission. Elite CEOs today pay consultants millions to create this same psychological environment. Teams where people feel like owners, not employees. Where individual contribution feels essential, not replaceable. Where the mission feels historic, not routine. The secret isn't better incentives or clearer communication. It's identity transformation that makes excellence feel natural rather than forced. Think of it like the difference between renting and owning a house. Renters do the minimum required maintenance, call the landlord when problems arise, and leave when a better option appears. But owners treat every detail like it matters, solve problems proactively, and stay committed through challenges because it's theirs. Jesus transformed his team from psychological renters to owners of the mission. He didn't just assign roles. He revealed how each person's unique leadership capacity was essential to building something extraordinary. This created what psychologists call ownership mentality, where people naturally excel because success feels personal, not professional. The leadership principle is powerful. When people's core identity shifts from employee to owner, their behavior automatically elevates without external pressure or constant management. They don't need motivation because they're expressing who they are, not just doing what they're told. This explains why elite CEOs invest massive resources in creating ownership culture. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Tesla don't just hire workers. They develop leaders who feel personally invested in the company's success. The most valuable employees aren't those working for the organization. They're those who feel like the organization belongs to them. Modern research confirms this. Teams with high psychological ownership demonstrate superior performance, innovation, and retention compared to traditionally managed teams. The secret isn't better management. It's helping people discover they're already leaders waiting for the right opportunity to prove it. If this is blowing your mind, stop right now and hit the subscribe button. Why? Because what comes next will blow up your view on influence and team building, and if you don't subscribe, the algorithm will hide my next secrets from you. But here's where the leadership psychology becomes impossible to ignore. Jesus didn't just create a high-performing team. He developed leaders who could build their own high-performing teams. This reveals the second hidden secret that separates elite CEOs from average managers: the ability to create leaders who multiply leadership. Most leaders focus on building strong teams that depend on their presence. But elite CEOs understand something more sophisticated. The goal isn't just team performance. It's developing team members who can create their own high-performing teams without ongoing supervision. Think about the psychological complexity of this achievement. Jesus had to simultaneously develop 12 individual leaders while maintaining team cohesion, then prepare them to lead independently without losing connection to the original mission. This requires understanding something profound about human psychology that most leaders miss. Here's the mystery that reveals hidden principles of leadership multiplication. How did Jesus develop leaders who could replicate his leadership approach in completely different contexts without losing effectiveness? How did he create leadership DNA that could adapt to any situation while maintaining core principles? Consider what happened after Jesus left. His team didn't collapse, didn't fragment, and didn't require ongoing management. Instead, they each became leaders capable of building movements that spread across cultures, languages, and continents. Peter built thriving communities in Jerusalem. Paul established networks across the Roman Empire. John created lasting institutions in Asia Minor. This shouldn't be psychologically possible. Research shows that most teams struggle to maintain performance when their primary leader is absent, even temporarily. Yet these leaders not only maintained effectiveness, they exceeded it, each creating impact that surpassed what they had achieved as team members. The mystery deepens when you realize they did this in environments far more challenging than their original context. No established infrastructure, hostile cultural conditions, and resistance from existing power structures. Yet somehow, the leadership principles they learned were so robust that they created success under any circumstances. What leadership development approach was so sophisticated that it created self-replicating leaders who could succeed independently while staying connected to shared principles? Here's the second secret that elite CEOs pay fortunes to master. Jesus had discovered what modern leadership research calls principle-based replication, the ability to embed core leadership principles so deeply that they can be expressed through any personality in any context without losing effectiveness. Think about the psychological sophistication required. Most leadership development focuses on teaching specific behaviors, techniques, or processes, but this creates what researchers call context dependency. Leaders who can only perform well in situations similar to their training environment. Jesus did something far more complex. He identified the underlying principles that create effective leadership regardless of personality, culture, or circumstances. Then he helped each team member discover how these universal principles could be expressed through their unique strengths and natural tendencies. This explains how Peter's confrontational style and John's contemplative approach both created extraordinary results. They weren't copying Jesus's external behaviors. They were expressing universal leadership principles through their authentic personalities. But here's the psychological breakthrough. Jesus understood that sustainable leadership multiplication requires what neuroscience calls principle integration, where core concepts become so deeply embedded in unconscious thinking that they guide decisions automatically, without conscious effort or external reminders. Modern research confirms this. The most effective leaders aren't those who follow prescribed behaviors, but those who have internalized principles so completely that right action feels natural and effortless. This creates what researchers call adaptive expertise, the ability to apply core principles creatively to novel situations. Jesus achieved this through what elite CEOs now call scenario-based development. Instead of teaching abstract concepts, he created real situations where team members had to apply leadership principles under pressure with immediate feedback and coaching. This accelerated the transition from conscious competence to unconscious mastery. But the psychological masterstroke was how he customized principle application for each person's unique wiring. Peter learned courage-based leadership. John developed influence through relationships. Matthew mastered systems thinking. Each became excellent in their natural strengths while maintaining shared core principles. This explains why his leadership development created multiplication rather than just replication. Each leader could create their own high-performing teams using approaches that felt authentic to their personality while maintaining the effectiveness of the original principles. Elite CEOs today spend millions trying to recreate this. Leadership development that creates independent leaders who maintain shared values and achieve consistent results, regardless of context or personality differences. Think of it like teaching music. A poor music teacher makes students copy exactly how they play. An average teacher shows students proper technique, but a master teacher helps each student discover how universal musical principles can be expressed through their unique musical voice and style. Jesus was a master teacher of leadership principles. He didn't create 12 copies of himself. He helped 12 unique individuals discover how core leadership principles could be expressed through their authentic personalities and natural strengths. This created leaders who could adapt to any situation while maintaining effectiveness. The leadership principle is profound. Sustainable leadership multiplication comes not from copying behaviors, but from internalizing principles so deeply that right action becomes natural expression of authentic personality. Peter's bold confrontation and John's gentle influence both worked because they were expressing universal leadership principles through their genuine selves. This explains why elite CEOs invest heavily in principle-based leadership development rather than behavior-based training. Companies like Southwest Airlines, Johnson & Johnson, and Patagonia don't create cookie-cutter leaders. They help diverse personalities discover how core principles can be expressed through individual strengths. Modern research confirms this approach creates leaders who can succeed in any context because they are not dependent on specific techniques or favorable circumstances. They've internalized principles that guide effective action regardless of external situations. This reveals why most leadership development fails. It focuses on external behaviors rather than internal principle integration. True leadership multiplication happens when people discover how universal principles can be authentically expressed through their unique design. If you're still watching, you are different from most people. Prove it. Leave your like now and subscribe. Because people like you deserve to know all the secrets I'll reveal in the next videos. But here's where Jesus' leadership mastery becomes truly extraordinary. He didn't just create high-performing teams or develop multiplying leaders. He established what modern researchers call anti-fragile systems, organizations that actually grow stronger under pressure, more innovative during crisis, and more unified when facing opposition. This reveals the third hidden secret that separates elite CEOs from everyone else. The ability to build systems that thrive on stress rather than break under pressure. Most organizations focus on creating stability and avoiding disruption. But elite leaders understand something more sophisticated. The goal is building anti-fragility that transforms challenges into competitive advantages. Think about the psychological impossibility of this achievement. Jesus created an organization that faced immediate persecution, had no financial resources, operated in hostile environments, and consisted of people with no organizational experience. Every traditional business metric predicted immediate failure, yet something unprecedented happened. The more pressure the organization faced, the stronger it became. Persecution led to geographic expansion. Resource constraints sparked innovation. Opposition created deeper commitment. Crisis generated more creative solutions. This defies everything we know about organizational psychology. Research shows that stress typically reduces performance, uncertainty creates paralysis, and resource scarcity limits growth. Organizations under pressure usually become more rigid, risk-averse, and internally focused. But Jesus had somehow created a system with opposite characteristics. Pressure increased adaptability, uncertainty sparked creativity, and constraints generated resourcefulness. The organization didn't just survive impossible circumstances. It used them as fuel for unprecedented growth. The mystery deepens when you realize this anti-fragility wasn't temporary resilience during crisis. It became the permanent operating system that enabled the organization to thrive across cultures, centuries, and completely different environments. From ancient Rome to modern Silicon Valley, the same principles continue creating anti-fragile results. What organizational design was so sophisticated that it transformed stress into strength, obstacles into opportunities, and opposition into acceleration? What did Jesus understand about building anti-fragile systems that modern executives are still trying to decode? Here's the third secret that elite CEOs pay millions to understand. Jesus had mastered what modern systems theory calls distributed resilience, the ability to create organizations where strength comes from the network itself, not from any central control point, making the system stronger when individual components face pressure. Think about the psychological sophistication required. Most organizations create resilience through centralized control, redundant systems, and protective measures. But this creates what researchers call fragile robustness, systems that appear strong but collapse when the central point fails or protective measures are overwhelmed. Jesus designed something far more sophisticated, a network where each individual component was simultaneously independent and interdependent, creating what complex systems theorists call emergent resilience. Strength that emerges from the relationships between parts rather than from the parts themselves. But here's the psychological breakthrough. He understood that true anti-fragility requires what neuroscience calls adaptive stress response. The ability to use pressure as information for positive adaptation rather than damage to be minimized. Instead of protecting his organization from stress, he taught it to metabolize stress as fuel for growth. Modern research confirms this counterintuitive principle. The strongest systems aren't those that avoid stress, but those that have learned to use stress as catalytic input for improvement. This requires psychological frameworks that interpret challenges as optimization opportunities rather than threats to survival. Jesus achieved this through what elite CEOs now call mission-driven anti-fragility. He created such clarity about core purpose that any pressure which aligned with that purpose became strengthening force, while pressure opposing the purpose revealed areas needing improvement. This explains why persecution strengthened rather than weakened the organization. Each challenge forced deeper commitment to core values, more creative expression of mission, and stronger bonds between team members. The opposition wasn't destroying the organization. It was refining it into a more powerful version of itself. But the psychological masterstroke was how he embedded this anti-fragility into the organization's DNA. He didn't just create processes that handled stress well. He developed people whose identity was strengthened by expressing core values under pressure. This made stress response automatic and positive, rather than effortful and defensive. Elite CEOs today study companies like Amazon, Netflix, and Tesla precisely because they demonstrate this same anti-fragile characteristic. They use market pressure, competitive threats, and resource constraints as catalysts for innovation and growth, rather than obstacles to overcome. The secret isn't avoiding pressure or building stronger defenses. It's creating systems that metabolize stress as fuel for evolution. Think of it like the difference between a rigid skyscraper and a living tree during a hurricane. The skyscraper tries to resist the wind through structural strength, but if the force exceeds design limits, it breaks catastrophically. The tree bends with the wind, using the pressure to strengthen its root system and develop more flexible branches that handle future storms even better. Jesus built his organization like a living tree, not a rigid skyscraper. Instead of creating defensive structures to resist pressure, he developed adaptive systems that used pressure as strengthening force. Each challenge made the organization more flexible, more creative, and more resilient for future difficulties. The leadership principle is profound. Anti-fragile organizations don't just survive pressure, they use pressure as catalyst for becoming better versions of themselves. This requires shifting from defensive thinking, how do we protect against this, to adaptive thinking, how can this make us stronger? This explains why elite CEOs obsess over building anti-fragile companies. Amazon treats competitive pressure as innovation catalyst. Netflix uses content restrictions as creativity drivers. Tesla transforms manufacturing challenges into technological breakthroughs. They've learned what Jesus mastered. The strongest organizations aren't those that avoid stress, but those that have developed the psychological and structural capacity to metabolize stress as fuel for improvement. Modern research confirms this. Anti-fragile systems consistently outperform both fragile systems that break under pressure and robust systems that merely resist pressure because they use environmental challenges as optimization input. This reveals the ultimate leadership secret. Building systems where pressure creates progress, obstacles generate opportunities, and opposition accelerates achievement. The three hidden leadership secrets that made Jesus extraordinary are the same principles elite CEOs use today. Identity-based motivation that transforms employees into owners, principle-based replication that creates multiplying leaders, and distributed resilience that builds anti-fragile systems. These aren't religious concepts. They're sophisticated psychological principles that create extraordinary results in any context. The question isn't whether these secrets work, but whether you'll master them to build something that lasts beyond your lifetime. If these secrets blew your mind, you need to see my next videos. but only if you hit the bell icon. Otherwise, you'll lose the most powerful secrets in history. What is your opinion on the ideas presented in this content? Leave it in the comments. Send this news to that friend of yours who has a keen perception. This analysis is speculative and based on historical accounts and leadership research, not clinical diagnosis or absolute historical fact.